It's a great pleasure to have you here with us and spending your time. On behalf of the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations and at Manipal Academy of Higher Education, I extend my warm welcome to you. And then my special thanks also to Sri Sheshadrichari. He has been your friend and colleague on a lot of things and the era itself. So what better we could have asked for not than having him on board today, also to make certain remarks on the book itself. So I'm sure it will create a lot of debate across the country, and it's a great value addition and also great addition to the knowledge that that exists so far to know the man and the era much more from an insider. So it's great to have Mr. Chari here with us. So Sri Sheshadri Chari, welcome to you on behalf of the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations. You are one amongst us, but yet you are also part of the larger this thing. So it's my pleasure to welcome you here. And my colleague, Dr. Monish, and all other colleagues, they're all here, my students. So welcome to each one of you. Make the best use of Shakti Sinha's intellectual, and also ask him critical questions. Let's see how much he wants to answer, how much he doesn't want to, but we'll try making the best use of the time that's available to us. So without wasting much of time, I welcome all of you to this particular gathering, and I would request my colleague, Dr. Monish, to take things forward.
Manish, unmute. Please unmute.
Thank you, Dr. Nandakishore, and thank you, sir, for reminding. For setting the grounds and context for a very special discussion on a very important book of a very important era for everyone who wants to understand Indian politics and foreign policy at large. And here is the book for everyone to see. And so Sri Shakti Sinha ji is not a stranger or new to anyone who has been following Indian politics and Indian foreign policy. He has been writing very vastly and very regularly on different issues impacting our country, our Indian foreign policy, and also the larger regional security environment and international affairs at large. So he really needs no introduction, but nevertheless, for the benefit of the student audience and those who have joined us in this book discussion, I would give a brief introduction. Sri Shakti Sinha ji is currently the Honorary Director of the Atal Bihari Vajpayee Institute of Policy Research and International Studies at the MS University in Vadodara. He was also the director of the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library. He is a distinguished fellow at the India Foundation, and he had a very long and fruitful association with Sri Atal Bihari Vajpayee, Prime Minister of India. And there is something which is acutely reflected in the book whenever you get an opportunity to read the book in totality. And he served as a secretary to the leader of the opposition between 1996 and 97, and also was the private secretary of Sri Atal Bihari Vajpayee between 1998 and 99. Again, very eventful years in the annals of Indian foreign policy, as he would elaborate in his remarks. And he has been a distinguished fellow in a number of important think tanks in India and abroad, and has held very important positions, including one in the World Bank and also the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan. So without further ado, I would again say one line about the book, and it's actually a snippet from his conclusion in the book. And as the book, in my assessment, is really a minefield of information and assessments to understand Vajpayee ji in all his complexities, that the author so aptly reflects as defying easy categorization. That's the words that Sri Shakti Sinha has used in the book. Like the country he so effectively represented, which is our country, India. So without further ado, it's my pleasure and honor to welcome Sri Shakti Sinha ji in this book discussion. The screen is yours, sirs.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Manish. Thank you very much, Nand Kishore. So good to see Professor Richari also around with you also, and of course the students and everybody else. No, I'm no stranger to Manipal. Yes, my only grouse is that I know you through the media. I know you through this electronic media digitally and not physically so much. Of course, none of you know personally, but otherwise, But yes, it's a pleasure to speak to you. And doubly pleasure because, I've been speaking a lot on my book, but it is generally to general audiences or people interested in foreign policy, but not really to an academic audience. So I feel very happy to do so. And I'm sure that as Manish is expected and Nankishore is expected, you really ask me tough questions. In fact, one of the criticisms against my book by somebody whom I spoke to the other day is that you have spoken too much about the foreign policy and nothing. And my point was, I'm reflecting a certain period of time and what were the key events. And therefore, obviously, in terms of priority, these events happened much more. In Mr. Vajpayee's second tenure, I'm discounting the 96 tenure. In second tenure from 1999 to 2004, there was far more domestic agenda. In the period that I'm covering, it wasn't. And I'm just being fair, Now, many people ask me, why do you write the book, etc. Two reasons, and I must tell you that very quickly. One is that I feel that that period of history today we romanticize. Oh, today is so polarized. Those were such a great days. Everything was hunky-dory. Mr. Vajpayee was such an inclusive person, unifier. And, what I remember the days was this is far from being calm and gentle days. It was very divisive. Every step that Mr. Vajpayee took or thought of taking was attacked. Called a fascist. He was called anti-minority, specifically anti-Christian, satanizing the system and legitimizing. To the extent people who have been gentle to him, people who thought they're complimenting him, called him he's the right man, the wrong party, even, So effectively delegitimizing his fact that he grew into politics as a member of a particular ideological family, the Sangh Parivar, from the beginning, He was right there, started the first RSS newspapers from Lucknow magazines. Then when the Jansangh was set up, he was seconded from the RSS to the Jansangh, where he went all his life, and then into the Bharatiya Janata Party. So as he said, how can the fruit be sweet if the tree is bad? So, but the effect to now especially romanticize that period of history, I thought was unfair. The second more important point I noticed was that, and this is somebody who's a student of history, is that we don't tend to look at contemporary history very critically. Yes, journalistic accounts are important. We do not discount them. We need them. But we also need somebody to take a step back and give the larger picture. You can't wait to understand this period, say 1947 to 2014, and wait for the year 2100 to do so. We need to do it continuously. History should be written and rewritten and revised eternally. There should be nothing fixed in history. Because as society changes, as thinking changes, as new ideas come up, the need for evaluation and re-evaluation is always there. And I thought that the Indian prime ministers, as such, have been understudied. The political system in theory has been studied in terms of its structure, but not in terms of its working so much. And this is a small attempt. I'm doing other works also to explain how the system works in practice. And that was it. Now, this book, it's a long book. Though I'm not praising myself, everybody who's read it has told me at least it's an easy read. So thank you very much to all those who think so. Now, this book basically has 5 themes to it, around which the book is structured. The first is that Mr. Vajpayee was the first genuine non-Congress prime minister that India has had, right? Everybody else has. Morarji Desai, the first non-Congress prime minister, was a Congress person all his life. Deve Gowda, a Congress person. I.K. Gujral, Congress person. V.P. Singh, Congress person. Chandrasekhar, Congress person for most of their lives. Chandrasekhar alone was there who left the Congress again in the emergency most of his life. So if you see that, Vajpayee was the first prime minister never to have been a member of the Congress party, number one. Number two, 1960 represents to me, and this is the first time he became prime minister, seminal moment in Indian politics. From 96 to 2021 that we are in, or this period of 25 years, The BJP has been in the pole position of Indian politics. So either the governments have been led by the BJP or have been established to prevent the BJP coming to power. So it's either BJP or anti-BJP kind of a polarization which has happened in politics. Earlier it was the Congress versus the rest. So when you say Tina in the earlier days, there is no alternative. It was the Congress and others. Since 96, it is the BJP and the others. Some come, some join, some go away. But that is the, so I think that must be understood. What must also be understood that Mr. Vajpayee to form the government in 98, the kind of obstacles put in his way, constitutional propriety was literally thrown away. This is the leader of the largest pre-poll alliance, just short of majority. There is no other claimant. He should have just been called to form a government. Now they started the practice of establishing, you get a confidence vote, otherwise even that is not required. Parliament can throw out a government anytime. He was not allowed to do that. Process was dragged. The BJP was forced to go back to some troublesome allies and again negotiate with them when this was a pre-poll alliance. You were asked to bring letters from pre-poll alliance partners, which to me is improper. And actually, when the government fell also, the same violation of constitutional propriety took place. And this somehow has not been highlighted. So I wanted to bring this domestic aspect very clearly. Having said that, the other 4 points of the book basically is that one, India broke this nuclear sword that was hanging over it. There was nuclear ambiguity. We were in favor of disarmament. India still is in favor of nuclear disarmament. If there is no disarmament, we cannot allow nuclear apartheid. We cannot allow nuclear apartheid, particularly because, this is the third point, is that because China and Pakistan are very old and very strong nuclear and missile cooperation program going together. China is an occupation of Indian territory. And in 1998, they articulated that, yes, we want improved relations with China, what Prime Minister Modi also says, but we need to understand ultimately what is happening, and therefore we should guard against it. And therefore it is a defensive thing. But if you are not exercising your option, nuclear option, what was the point of the option? 67, you got the NPT, which effectively made haves and the have-nots, 5 haves, all of us are have-nots. And then the CTBT, the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, comes into effect in 97, which in effect bans testing. So, I mean, India's window of testing had gone actually. It was forcibly opened by Pokhran 2 in 1998. Pokhran 1, India did it, Mrs. Gandhi did it, but then backed out by calling it PNE, Peaceful Nuclear Explosion. The world didn't believe you. Sanctions started then, the energy was started then. So India had to do this test. One, to make the point that nuclear weapons are dangerous, let's go in for disarmament. If it is not disarmament is not possible, we will not accept apartheid. Number two, India faces a peculiar strategic challenge in its own neighborhood, where two of its big neighbors, they're both big countries, Pakistan is a country of 200 million people, have strong nuclear and missile cooperation directed against you. China is an occupation of Indian territory, and where relations have improved, the problems have not been sorted out. So therefore, to defend India, we need nuclear weapons. It's a defensive purpose, not to get into an aggressive or a war situation, but to prevent a war happening. And the third, and this is part of international understanding again, can you be considered a great power if you're not a nuclear power? Just think for a moment, it's just a thought experiment. After Second World War, had Japan been in a different position and Japan became the leading economy in the world, second leading economy in the world by the late 60s, if Japan had had military muscle at that moment of time, Japan would have been considered a superpower. The fact that Japan is not considered a superpower, let's be clear, it is because Japan is militarily weak. Forced by the MacArthur Constitution, no doubt. It has changed, of course, many ways, but not legally. And therefore, you need, nobody will invite India to sit on the head table. You have to kick the door open and walk in. That you have to accept. So it's not just an ego issue. We are thumping our chest. No, we needed to do that. The nuclear threshold was very important to break into. We did it. We paid a massive price for it. If you read my chapter, you'll certainly have a different idea, I guess, about many countries in the world, the language they use against us, the kind of financial pressures, sanctions were put on us, our people were thrown out. It was a miserable world, but we had to face it. Very difficult days. And domestically, opposition was not with you. Even though the nuclear test was common to everybody, weaponization was started by Rajiv Gandhi in 1988. So it was not that it is one party, and yet because it was done by Vajpayee and the BJP, massive opposition to it domestically. One person even said, you should have tested, but don't make it public. I mean, but anyway, we leave it at that. The second was the world was equating you and Pakistan. You tested, Pakistan tested, you are responsible for it. You and Pakistan sorted it out. Our point was testing was not Pakistan oriented. Our nuclear weapons program, missile program is not China, is not Pakistan oriented. We had mentioned China specifically as a potential threat. Situation had improved, we said, but not yet to the desired purpose. And therefore, we needed to test. So we had to demonstrate dehyphenate Pakistan. So we made the outreach to Pakistan. Negotiations started almost immediately. The July end meeting at SARC. And we continuously then the New York and then the Bus Yatra, Lahore. There was need to tell the world, India will take that extra step to improve relations with Pakistan, to establish peace in the subcontinent, because you do not want to see two nuclear weapon states at tensions with each other. This was necessary to do that. People, Mr. Vajpayee was attacked for it, or Lahore was a disaster. No, it was not. It was needed. Had Lahore not been there, subsequent developments where India's position in the world change would not have happened. The outreach to Pakistan was very, very important. And I'm glad to discuss this with anybody who asks the question. The third important thing was the understanding that from 1991, there were tectonic shifts in the world. The Cold War had ended. The Soviet Union had dissolved. Russia was a rump. India was friendliness in the world. If you saw what happened in the United Nations throughout that period, American pressure on you, accession of Kashmir was questioned by the USA. The Human Rights Commission was on top of you. Mr. Vajpayee helped the government by going to Geneva as a leader. You were really lonely in the world. You had to develop relations with America. Mr. Vajpayee started the dialogue, the Jaswant Singh Chopra dialogue, and then in New York at the Asia Society, September 1998, called USA and India natural allies. No prime minister before us since has used the word ally. We don't like the word ally. But when he said it allies, he meant it in terms of sharing common interests and common values. Underlying feature was, if another power develops in our neighborhood, we must be working closely together, must be cooperating together. I don't have to tell you who that other power is. Again, Mr. Vajpayee was criticized for it, but the ally was not a NATO ally or a Warsaw Pact ally. The ally, as I said, was more a frame of reference, more a meeting of minds, and that was very essential to do. And then, of course, the most critical part of it, which is, you have domestically, you have the nuclear, you have Pakistan, you have USA, and then you get the Kargil war thrust on you. After your government is fallen, this is a caretaker government. Politically, a weak position. Caretaker governments cannot take decisions. At this moment, tactically brilliant Musharraf sent the Pakistani army across the LOC in end of winter, just before spring starts. And the Indian army realized that their post on the high hills, Himalayas, above Kargil heights, but actually going from far beyond Kargil, but it's called Kargil, so I'll leave it there. And you were faced with this terrible position. The idea, of course, of Musharraf was very clear. Bring Kashmir on the tactical agenda, put pressure on India, and in any case, we occupied their heights. They can't do anything. We hit back very, very robustly. Musharraf did not expect the Indian army to do such a good job. The Air Force came also worked together, and in a quiet way, which is not reported too much in the media, the Indian Navy did a very good job, almost blockading Karachi. So this combined pressure of the military was so good, and India was doing such a good job. But yet India laid some rules. Mr. Vajpayee laid some two very, very important rules. One, that the war will not be extended beyond the part where Pakistani troops have crossed the LOC. Of course, they said it's Mujahideen, it was the Pakistani troops. Two, Indian Army, Indian Air Force military will not cross the LOC. For the second, he has been attacked. Even today, he's attacked. Why did you do that? The war would have ended faster. No, sir, the war would have taken longer to end. Because you did not cross the LOC, the world saw you as a responsible nuclear weapon state who, despite being provoked, gravely provoked by a neighbor nuclear weapon state, is trying to control things, keep it contained and not expanding, which could lead to a nuclear war. Had the world feared a nuclear war, India was been forced to go in for a ceasefire. We were clear ceasefire only if Pakistani troops withdraw across the LOC. So unlike 65, unlike 71, this government could stand up to the world and say no ceasefire till Pakistan withdraws beyond the LOC. The army, Pakistani army, realized that the bluff had been called. They put pressure on Nawaz Sharif, who went to America on 4th of July, literally begged the Americans. First, he evacuated. Americans said, if you want our help, get out. And finally, Pakistan accepted that it was their troops and they vacated the line. Of course, military pounding continued, but from that moment, the situation changed. 2.5 weeks after the Blair House Agreement of 4th of July, the war was over. Had we crossed the LOC, would America and the world put pressure on Pakistan? Even China kept quiet when Pakistan's game was exposed. But had we acted in an adventuresome manner, the world would not have seen us. And therefore, I call my book The Years That Changed India. Because on all these issues, the non-BJP government, the nuclear option, the very risky but important move to Pakistan, the understanding of the world has changed and the United States is there. We must engage the United States despite the present embarrassment and despite the present problems. And lastly, that this was in India to stand up to the world and say, no, thank you. Yes, we want peace, but on our terms. So the ability to do that was so important. And therefore, that in sum and substance, dear friends, is what my book is all about. I hope I'm taking too long, Manish.
No, not at all, sir. It was a pleasure listening to you, and thank you so much.
1 minute, but before that, when I recite this part of the book, that does not mean, young ladies and gentlemen, that you will not buy and read the book. The idea is to entice you to read the book. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yes, certainly, sir. I think after this lecture and the discussion, you should contact the Amazon people and see the upsell in your book. So thank you so much, sir. I mean, I've read the book, and after hearing you, and this was exactly on my mind that I wanted to speak. I wanted you to speak a little bit on why you wrote the book, and you did that in the first go itself. And I think it's such an important book in terms of dealing with, as you rightly said, the years that changed India, our engagement with the outside world, our ability to negotiate, from a position of strength, and the question of what gave us that strength. Did it come from the leadership? Did it come from other resources? I think this book really opens up the doors for those who want to know about these years, but also those who want to go deeper and explore more about the years that you have covered in this book, which is in itself a first-hand account, an insider's account of a kind of the years when the seeds were shown about the kind of debate that we have now about India's rise and what India's rise means for India and for the world at large. So thank you so much, sir. Now, without further ado, I request and invite Sri Seshadri Chari. Again, no stranger to anyone who follows geopolitics and international relations, who follows Indian media and the global media, has been an avid commentator, an eminent political analyst and commentator on all issues impacting India's interests at home and in the world. He is also associated with Manipal Academy of Higher Education in an advisory and consultant role. And it's such a pleasure to have him around with us. And without any delay, now I request Sri Seshadri Chari, who also shares, a long association with Sri Vajpayee ji, to give his special remarks. Sir, the screen is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Monish. Thank you, Dr. Nandakishore, and of course, sincere thanks to Shakti Sinha also. And unlike Shakti Sinha, I am not an insider. I'm an outsider. But one thing common between me and Shakti Sinha is that at the time when Vajpayee ji was the Prime Minister, both of us were not part of the party. As a bureaucrat, he was not a member of the party, and as editor of organizer, organizer editors were not supposed to be a member of any political party. So I was not a member of any political party, much less the BJP, of course. But by virtue of being the editor of organizer, I was practically the link between the RSS and the Prime Minister's office at that time. So I can say with a little bit of command over the situation, but also with a little bit of trepidation that the PMO was very different in those days. Vajpayee in the hot seat was a very different person. He was of course, by virtue of being the Prime Minister, he had all the authority, but whenever you used to meet him, I never felt that I am meeting the Prime Minister of the country. It was more like meeting someone, an elderly person, one of your uncles, and you could talk to him anything about any subject. And his most important things would be obviously on what the menu for the lunch or dinner should be, and then about his poems, about historical personalities, and in spite of being from the Hindi heartland, his knowledge of languages, especially Marathi. So I remember when you spoke to him something about Savarkar, he told me, "नहीं, ये उस कविता में नहीं है, इस कविता में है." So he could quote the Savarkar's Marathi poem. So I was quite taken aback. So when I was going through the book, of course, as I told Shakti Sinha, I have not read the book, but I've just gone through the book. So I'm going to read the book thoroughly, of course. It paints the picture of Vajpayee. So when, as Shakti Sinha very rightly said, as many people have commented, the language of the book is so simple that it's very easy to draw the picture of Vajpayee in front of you when you are reading. And as I was reading some of the pages, I could really connect back to those days. And I remember some of the incidents also, especially when he became the Prime Minister. We had a meeting on national security. And that was the time when we were thinking of forming some sort of an organization to look after the national security issues. Very incidentally, I mean, as they say in jobs, something called co-terminus. So I can't say it was my job because I was not a paid employee of organizer, but my editorship of organizer was co-terminus with the Prime Ministership of Vajpayee. So we lost, I mean, he lost his job as Prime Minister, but I didn't have to lose. I was transferred from organizer to BJP in 2004. So when after the election was over, after we lost, and then I was not the editor, I was transferred to BJP. So I was looking after Uttarakhand in those days. And then when I went and met him once, so he said, अटल जी आजकल मैं तो ऑर्गेनाइजर का संपादक नहीं हूँ और लेकिन अनएम्प्लॉयड भी नहीं हूँ. तो उन्होंने कहा, हाँ, आपकी और मेरी स्थिति समान है, हम लोग अनएम्प्लॉयड नहीं है लेकिन नौकरी भी नहीं है. So he made fun of it. I mean, a man who has lost the election had no remorse on his face. That's why sometimes when I mean, in the present circumstances, when we see what is happening in the United States, especially in reference to Trump, Atalji was an example for how to lose and how to resign. His 1996, 98 speech the 13-day government, he made fun of it also. He said, "Pehli sarkar 13 din ki, dusri sarkar 13 mahine ki." Who said 13 is an unlucky number? Mere liye to 13 is very lucky number, he used to say. So he made fun of it also. And even resigning. He was the most short-lived prime minister probably in the country, but that did not affect him at all. But he never made any compromise with principles for the sake of convenience. I remember when he was sworn in as the prime minister, the 13-day government. The day he became the prime minister, the same day there was a small gathering in the Parliament Annex building. We were all standing there, and it was a lunch program also, and all political parties were there. In fact, all the members of the NDA, some were part of the NDA, some were not part of the NDA, but they were supporting NDA. And Vajpayee did not have the numbers on his side. So, and I was very close to, in those days, there was another political party in Tamil Nadu called Tamil Manila Congress. That is also TMC. Unlike the West Bengal TMC, it was TMC, Tamil Manila Congress, and GK Mupanar was it was his party, in fact. From Congress, he had shifted to Tamil Manila Congress. And he had enough numbers in that election who could support Vajpayee. And the 13-day government could have survived. So I went and spoke to Atalji saying that can we not take support from Mupanar? Mupanar is ready to support. So Atalji said, "ठीक है, पूछिए उनको क्या चाहिए." So I went back to Mupanar, and then Mupanar said I should be made the deputy prime minister. And I came back to Vajpayee. In fact, all this was happening in the same hall. On one side, in one corner, Atalji was standing with some people, and the other side, Mupanar was standing. And I was running between these two. Then Atalji said, but the party has decided that we will not have a deputy prime minister, and if there is going to be a deputy prime minister, the deputy prime minister also should be from the BJP. So I cannot go back on that principle that we have decided. So उनको कहिए नहीं हो सकता है. I mean, a person who could have, as a prime minister of India, and as a man who decided the future of this country, we could have just said, ठीक है, उनको कह देंगे, बाद में देख लेंगे. No compromise with principle for the sake of convenience. That was Vajpayee. It's very difficult, and there was nothing, no fear of anybody, no going down before anybody. And the book also mentions about the nuclear test that we conducted, and that was the first time. And Vajpayee knew that many prime ministers before him, except Mrs. Indira Gandhi, after Indira Gandhi, this nuclear test could not be conducted by any prime minister. But he decided to do that. And he said, we will keep it a secret till the end. But it was done. No going down before anybody. But at the same time, after the sanctions, Vajpayee said that, ठीक है, whatever we wanted to do, we have done. Now let us go beyond this. Let us be again open our friendship with USA, and something has to be done. That is where he called Jaswant Singh and said, okay, what should be done? Whatever has to be done, you go ahead and do it. So it was very difficult times. We used to feel how Jaswant Singh is going to do. Of course, there are so many other incidents that have taken place between Jaswant Singh and Vajpayee and so many other people who are working. The RSS incidentally had a very, very strong group in the US. So that RSS people who were very close to the American establishment in those days, we used to talk to them, we used to find out what all should be done, and then coordinating between those people and Jaswant Singh. And Jaswant Singh did not have direct RSS background, so he did not know so many people. So Vajpayee used to say, कि हाँ ठीक है, and he used to know each and every one of them. So हाँ मैं तो इनके घर में रहा हूँ, ओ इनकी बेटी क्या कर रही है पूछ लीजिए. I mean that kind of a personal interaction. So whenever we talk about individuals nowadays we hear this word, what is that, body language, and then personal chemistry. Vajpayee did not show off this personal chemistry, but there was a personal chemistry between him and world leaders. And it was not, there were a number of world leaders who would respect him, who would say that if Atal Bihari Vajpayee has said this, then I think it should be correct. That kind of confidence that he evoked. And Shakti Sinha's book very rightly mentions it's a very important incident which we all should read and know more about. This one incident about Sukhoi, which you have mentioned. I was just going through that page also. Narasimha Rao was the one who decided about Sukhoi. But then the Russians were in a very bad shape. Russian economy was in a very bad shape. So they wanted some advance. I think some $300 billion or something was given. Now, this was a big thing. You don't have a plane. You have not had any discussion about it. There was no parliamentary discussion. And the Prime Minister signs the contract, and that too paying such a huge amount. Now you imagine what a massive subject this is for the opposition party. At that time, Atal Bihari Vajpayee was in the opposition. So he could have gone to town with it and then brought down the Narasimha Rao government on this issue. But then he went into the details. He said, why did you do this? They must have had a talk with Narasimha Rao, and Narasimha Rao said, these are all the things, national security, and so many other things were there. So he said, in the interest of national security, this decision has been taken. Of course, I would have liked if we had had at least across the board meeting on this, but if you have not done it, fine. But in the interest of national security, we will uphold. And I tell you, he told Narasimha Rao that I will not make it a political issue. Strangely, after him, the next defense minister was Mulayam Singh Yadav, I think, right? Shakti ji. So Mulayam Singh Yadav came and he took the same subject a little more forward. And one person who came to the rescue of not only Narasimha Rao, but also Mulayam Singh was Atal Bihari Vajpayee. This was the metal that he was made of. So no compromise with principles, no compromise with national security, and no attachment to the post. These are some of the great things that we could talk about. Of course, as someone very closely interacting with him in those days, I can say all these things, but I would have really liked Shakti Sinha. Of course, I am sure Shakti Sinha will come up with the next book, considering all the suggestions that have come. One thing that probably requires little more explanation from the foreign policy perspective and also from strategic perspective is India wanted to have sign border trade agreement with China. And we did sign a border agreement with China. Out of 3 border agreements, only 2 were signed. One was not to be signed. Much later it was dropped. And there is a big story why it was dropped that I won't go into those details because that involves Sayyid Shahabuddin. Anyway, I won't go into those details now. But could we have avoided this issue of recognizing the Tibet Autonomous Region as part of China, which no Prime Minister after 1954, we signed an agreement in 1954 with China. In 1962, that agreement was abrogated. But after 1962, till 2003, no Prime Minister had ever agreed that Tibet is a part of China. There were so many other nomenclatures, words were used, but this particular concept was not used. Of course, I have had tremendous arguments with both Brijesh Mishra and Vajpayee in those days. But someday we can discuss all these things. maybe the book should probably give more throw light on this, but I think it should be the part of the next book. But all the same, Atalji used to always say whenever there was a book release function, he used to speak very good about the book and always used to say, लेकिन आप लोग कृपा करके पैसा देकर खरीद के बुक पढ़िएगा, पैसा देकर खरीदिए. So I would suggest the same thing. Please buy this book and read. Thank you, Monish. Thank you, Shakti sir, for wonderful work you have done. Thank you, Dr. Nandakishore.
Thank you, Sri Chari. Along with Shakti Sinha and you, both of you, I think, really bringing to life the personality that Vajpayee was in these few minutes in front of our. We can already sort of visualize the eventful years that that this personality and this Prime Minister brought to the fore for India. And Sri Chari was mentioning about lunch menus. And right very beginning in the book itself, I found that Sri Shakti Sinha also mentions about the experience of eating lunch with Sri Vajpayee ji. Both of them engrossed in their own lunch. And as Shakti Sinha ji said, that was the easiest thing to do, eat lunch and not talk to each other. So I think a lot of themes and issues of those era has been covered in this minutes of presentation, and I think the student community will certainly have a lot of queries and questions to be addressed to the author. So without any delay, I would like to open up the floor for question and answer. You may please use the hand raise bar menu on the top and raise your hand, and please introduce yourself before asking the question to the author.
At the same time, those of them in the hall, the lecture hall is actually full. They can go to the podium. There is a microphone there. They can as well address from there. Those of you are directly listening to on the big screen.
So while the students are thinking about their questions, I think I'll take the opportunity of being the moderator to raise the first two questions for the benefit of all also. So in addition to what Sri Chariji was asking about the China policy, I think it's somewhat related to that. In terms of, in the context of the book that we collaborated on also, while we are dealing with this China challenge in the present times. Going back to Sri Vajpayee's monumental visit to China in 2003, which really raised a lot of issues about the nature of this relationship, about CBMs between the two countries, how to take this relationship forward. What do you think would be the losses and the gains of that visit and the years of Vajpayee and India-China relations? That is one. The second one would be something that you mentioned in the book, which is, I think, although we all have general ideas about what broad consensus really means in foreign policy making. I think you mentioned in the book about Vajpayee ji being associated with this idea of a broad consensus in Indian foreign policy. Now, given the times that we are in the present government and the debates on Indian foreign policy, how do you see the trajectory of this broad consensus from the times of Vajpayee ji to the times of Prime Minister Narendra Modi? So these are the two first questions that I had in mind. I'm sure while sir is answering these questions, the student will come up with their own questions. The screen is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mahesh. I'll start the second question first because that is the easier question. The fact is that while broad consensus Mr. Vajpayee followed, when he himself was prime minister, particularly the period after the nuclear test, when relations with China deteriorated, because in our letters to world leaders like Clinton and others, we made it clear that though our relationship with China has improved a lot and we want to see further improvement, the fact of the matter is China has an occupation of Indian territory, and there's been a very deep Chinese-Pakistani nuclear and missile cooperation. And therefore, we are threatened and we are doing this. China got very angry and used harsh language. There were enough people in the opposition, including leaders, who blamed Vajpayee for spoiling relations with China. It is a good country like China. You have made it into an enemy. Well, Mr. Vajpayee did not tell China to have nuclear cooperation with Pakistan, or more than nuclear cooperation. I think people underestimate the missile cooperation with Pakistan. I mean, after all, you can make a bomb, but how do you deliver the bomb? How do you deliver the payload? You need delivery systems. So China, these actions of China predates Mr. Vajpayee. Actually, it goes back to the 70s and the 80s itself, as read Andrew Small's book. You know how deep that relationship was. And yet people attack Mr. Vajpayee. Similarly, on Pakistan, people are not happy with his making up with Pakistan. I mean, the same people who till the other day were proponents of India-Pakistan friendship, when Mr. Vajpayee did, they attacked it. No, first tell Pakistan to stop our terrorism, then we'll talk to them. So, in the sense that, yes, broad consensus while you're sitting on the chair, but unlike Mr. Vajpayee, who supported the government's foreign policy by and large throughout his career, he attacked Nehru specifically on specific points, but otherwise he was supportive of government. He told every visiting delegation which met him when I did opposition and I was in the room that, yes, we have great opposition with the government, with the opposition, but on foreign policy, we are one. There's a national consensus. So the fact is, if today you see people attacking, and I saw somebody writing that Modi's bad handling of economy that made China do what it is doing in Ladakh. I mean, people now are going to any extent to do that. That is sad, unfortunately, but I'm not surprised. I'm really not surprised. Yes, broad consensus while in office, but while in the opposition, I'm free to attack, So it's not very healthy, but that's how our democracy works. Now, the other question is the 2003 visit. It was controversial then also, though not very controversial, because by 2003, we had seen China as a very benign country. See, the fact of the matter is, after 1967, there has been no incidents. India-China relationship was picking up. More important, China was still a very small economy in the year 2003. Its military was infinitely weaker than the Indian military. Navy didn't exist. So the feeling that you could go ahead, though I share Mr. Acharya's anguish at that statement, it not only, I would go a little different interpretation. It limited Tibet to the TAR, where large parts of Tibet are in Qinghai, Yunnan, and other provinces of China. The Dalai Lama's own hometown is not a part of Tibet by the Chinese standards, but it is not in TAR. It is a Tibetan autonomous area within the Qinghai province. So, to me, it is a troubling thing. I guess in hindsight, it is only because they felt that it's time to get China on our side and work together with China. Because, at the back of everybody's mind, even then, Primakov had suggested 98, Russia, India, China come together against America without saying so. That the American hegemon has become simply too big, that America is suffering hubris, and therefore we should in some sense try to balance out so that America is not goes unchecked. I would only say that this could be a possible explanation. I still feel that statement, to my mind, should not have been made. Now, there are lots of gains, of course. Relationship improved. Our trade started improving a lot. And on many issues like climate change and all, India and China work together. So the necessity of working with China, Mr. Vajpayee was very keen on it. Prime Minister Modi demonstrated the amount of political risk Prime Minister Modi has spent trying to improve with China. No Prime Minister would have done so. Because you must understand, unlike the United States, China is my neighbor. Not only is China my neighbor, China is influential in my neighborhood. I therefore have this problem. So I need to, can I counter China? No. Can I work with China to reduce hostilities? So, it's a very complicated thing, but yes, that is what I feel is that. But yes, as Mr. Acharya says, we need to study this further. We need to see it in a broader context and try to work, what possibly the counterfactors, what should have been done instead.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. There,
I
I
can
see
s-
that. There's a- Yeah.
I can see a hand. I can see Vasu Sharma. Right?
Please go ahead.
Unmute yourself. Yeah.
Good evening, sir. This is Kiran. I'm a first year student here at the department.
Okay.
So
Please go ahead.
my question is more about the political part of the thing. So in the recent past, if we look at the trend, even for coalition governments, even if it's like two or three parties, we see that there's a trend of the governments falling off with minimal misunderstandings and that sort, and the coalitions don't have they are not in that strong thing. But we know that during the 99 India government, the coalition had 20 plus parties. So what is that special factor which made the coalition to successfully have the government for that full term, and what is there for the present leaders to learn from Vajpayee? I wanted to know about that.
Okay. This is a very accurate. If you look at the numbers, then you needed coalitions. And therefore, you had to try and work with each other. It was not, if you read my book, it was not an easy journey. It was a very painful journey, very painful journey. I mean, Mamta wanted the CPM government in Bengal to be dismissed. Naveen Patnaik wanted the Congress government in Odisha to be dismissed. Nitish Kumar wanted the RJD government, Rabri government in Bihar to be dismissed. And Jayalalitha Amma wanted the DMK government to be dismissed. Now, it's hardly the job of central government to dismiss state governments only because your alliance partners wanted. But yes, Mr. Vajpayee recognized that these are representing strong regional feelings, and we must try to appreciate it. Even at a time when the allies were attacking him, this is February of 1999, February 1999, he said, yes, but I understand that, but I must understand their angst also. So that effort was there. But even he, let me assure you, parties were in and out. Mamta walked in, didn't joined completely, walked out. Ramvilas Paswan, LJP, joined in after the breakup of the Janata Dal, walked out. So people walking in and out. The Kerala Congress money group broke up and one person joined. The Kerala plantation industry is very clear. They should be represented in government, whichever government that is. So, BJP had 160, then 180 MPs. When the BJP has 303 MPs itself in the Lok Sabha, then obviously the bargaining possibilities become much reduced. Having said that, I think it is the effort of political parties to stay in power, and therefore they talk to each other. But yes, as Chari told you, at a certain moment you say, no, I cannot give deputy prime ministership. I will not dismiss the DMK government. Had Mr. Vajpayee listened to Jayalalitha and dismissed the DMK government, well, his government would have survived. But for how long? Some more irrational demand would have come in, right? Which you could not have. Not irrational, I'll say unreasonable demand would have come in. So banding coalitions has never been easy. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Vajpayee had one advantage, of course, that most of the partners had 3 and 4 MPs. MDMK, Vaiko had 4 people. PMK, 3 people. Mamta was very large at 9 people. So, it was a very mixed up kind of a situation. So we should learn. Yes, we should learn to try and work with them. But sometimes you have to say no.
We have a question from Madhuri. Please go ahead.
Hi, sir. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yep, loud and clear.
Oh, okay, sir. Good evening, sir. That was an amazing lecture. I look forward to reading your book. So my question is not related to the book or Mr. Vajpayee, but I am interested in your take on. So last week, the U.S. ambassador to India, Mr. Kenneth Juster, put the possibility of sanctions on the table while talking about S-400, and he said that India has to make a choice about their strategic relations. But here we have the fact that China is increasingly becoming a hegemon in the Eastern Hemisphere, and then there is CPEC which is happening, and on the other hand, Russia and China seem to be close. So we need to have a friend in the other hemisphere. So can we afford to take this risk? And if we do take this risk, how is it going to play out for us? And what sort of hand should India play to make sure that we don't get excuse me, screwed over a lot. Pardon my language, sir. Sorry.
Not at all. That is the reality. It's not the language, it is the reality. And both of you who asked your questions, put your hands down, otherwise I'll get confused. But Madhuri, it's a very good question. It's a difficult question because, nothing is static. In international democracy, nothing is static. India has an additional challenge, which you have not mentioned, that unlike the Trump administration, which saw China as the main rival, the incoming Biden administration has made it clear that it is Russia who is the main rival. So India will have a difficult time in going ahead with the SS-400. Having said that, countries act in their supreme national interest. I can work with my partners and make some changes. That's how partnerships are. Partnership, you give some, you take some. You win some, you lose some. Because you see, larger engagement is essential to both of you. It will require considerable diplomatic expertise, diplomatic effort on our side, nimble-footedness, to explain to the Americans that this SS-400 system is essential for our security, and that this one transaction is not likely to change things very much. So Russia globally is concerned, but for our survival, it is important. The Americans simply don't have an alternative to this. The Americans had a system comparable in technology to this, even slightly expensive. I'm sure the government would have gone in for it. But the parallel American system is simply not of the same caliber. And therefore, the need for us to be ready to defend ourselves is so strong that I think it's not the 1998 situation. It is solvable, but yes, it will require considerable diplomatic. Of course, you need America. You have to work with America, but you are not America's junior partner yet. You're partners. We have lots of areas we agree with, increasingly more and more. There are lots of areas we don't agree with. So how do you reduce the disagreement and increase the agreements is what will be the real test of Indian diplomacy and the Indian government in the coming months to come. So I have no answer to say that should we do it? No, we need it, so we will do it. It's our defense. When we are under threat, America is not there. We are there. As I said, we are China's, thanks to the Chinese occupation of Tibet, we are China's neighbors now. America is not. So we obviously have to see things differently.
There's a question from Sarthak Shukla from the Cuts.
Hi, I'm Sarthak. Am I audible?
Yes,
Yes,
Sarthak,
please.
loud and clear.
Thank you. So I'm here as an external participant, courtesy to Mr. Sinha's active social media postings, inviting everybody to this talk. My question is on this parallels that recently are being drawn between the prime ministership and style of governance of different former prime ministers, be it the Modi Indira Gandhi parallel or Modi being the slightly more extremist version of, say, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, for lack of a better word. So what is your take on how these different prime ministers, vis-a-vis their vision about structural reforms in the economy? Because all the prime ministers, say from Vajpayee, Mr. Modi, Ms. Gandhi, even Narasimha Rao and Manmohan Singh, they are credited to economic reforms and structural milestone reforms in that sense. So what is your take on what the vision of them particularly was when they were undertaking such structural economic reforms? Was there any coherence, or there was, the need of the hour, was it? Thank you.
Thank you, Sarthak. Thank you. One, of course, is that every talk I give, and I give a talk a day, today is actually my second, is that normally the Modi-Vajpayee panel always comes out, a master comment on that. But yours is a much broader question, so thank you for that. It is much broader. We have followed a certain economic path for a long time. It was clear by 1991, actually it was clear by the 80s only, that that path had gone nowhere. Poverty rates were not coming down. India was simply not growing. Countries much smaller than India were now becoming economic giants. We were not. So we took economic reforms because at that moment, this seemed to be the only path to generate growth. To be fair, when we did that from 91 onwards, every successive government more or less followed it. Some speeded it. Mr. Vajpayee's government actually after 19 speeded it considerably. After 94, actually after 93, the Narasimha Rao government didn't move in reforms at all. Deve Gowda's government moved in spurts. Gujarat's government was too weak and distracted. And then it required Mr. Vajpayee to do it. Coming to the 2008 economic crisis and subsequent, it does seem that that model, while it helped India grow, had certain inherent problems. we were simply not generating enough employment in the system. That's very, very serious. You can't have a country growing fast, by and large poverty falling, and poverty has fallen considerably in India, but you're not providing simply enough quality jobs to your people. You have a massive demographic bulge that you take advantage of, but you can't take advantage of demographic bulge if you simply don't have the jobs for it. So at certain times, rethinking was required to be done, which is being done now. Whether this is the right thing, only history will tell. The trouble with economic reforms is it starts delivering or failing after a lag, and therefore at that moment, we are all prisoners of our advisors in that sense. But another thing you must keep in mind, all of you, is that when you look at different prime ministers and their decisions, look at the objective circumstances outside. See, context is very, very important in policy making. What works at a particular period of time will not work at a different period of time. Do I have the courage to change it, or do I feel that this is delivered in the past, I'll stick on to it? That's one point of view. Other point of view, this has delivered, by tinker with it. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. And therefore, when I said at the beginning that I feel that we are not studying our decision making properly, we look at our structures as legally defined, not as they are in practice. And the need for political scientists to really work much, much harder on trying to understand, to try to link the objective circumstances outside, specifically the changes, because without exogenous factors, your decision making is pointless. But what internally has changed also, the social composition of the government has changed, decision making will change. Can we try to understand that better? And then when you get out of that, then by initially discounting the individual factor, later on you can bring in the individual factor and then see what difference did that particular individual make. If somebody else had to do it, how would they have done it? So as a serious political scientist, that is what I would advise anybody to do. And Dr. Nand Kishore wants to ask me a question, I can say.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you for that superb lecture. It's always a joy to listen to you. I have three questions quickly. One, is it true that you have omitted the years between 2000 to 2004? That would be good for the audience to know. Second is, what type of help we received from Israel when the sanctions were put on us? And third is, your book also seems to be silent on the internal affairs of the party, because you have dealt, let's say, on the coalition component and the difficulties that it had and the type of leadership quality Vajpayee displayed. But how was it taken when such type of drastic decisions were taken? Because BJP is a cadre-based party. It's not that somebody simply says and then everybody says Ji Huzur. At least during at that particular point of time, for sure, it was not that way. So in that way, how was the internal consensus that was built within the party would be of help, though you weren't part of the party then, but at least you were privy to a lot of these informations being close to the Prime Minister. So it would be nice if you can say, because we also have students who study Indian government and politics. Thank you.
Good. Thanks. Quickly. First, my contract with Penguin was 65,000 words. I've covered the 98-99 period when I was there completely. It's already 1,15,000 words. So I had to stop somewhere, And to cover the next part when I was not there, I was in touch but not physically present, it required me to do far more research than I did. This research took me about 2 years. I read every single daily newspaper, English language, top 3 or 4 newspapers of 18 months, every single issue. I read all the top English magazines. I read the Hindi ones, and I read references here and there. Reference to an EPW article, I would go to EPW. Reference to New York Times, I would go there. Reference to whatever, I would go there. This took me a lot of, and I was doing this work when I was a full-time working person. So it was difficult for me to go beyond that. But I think enough questions are being raised each time I speak over the later period. Shashadi also raised it. I think at some moments, some of us would have to look into that. Now, the Israel part is relatively simple. Yeah, sorry.
In fact, I thought for the next book. That was my view, in fact.
Yeah. Okay, your view also. Okay. Give me a good research assistant. And give me some funding and we'll look at that. Okay. Now, on Israel, I have a relatively easier answer. The Israeli help was essential in the Kargil war, not during the time of the sanctions. Sanctions, what hit you was the lack of access to international capital, especially concessional official flows from the World Bank and the ADB. That was hit here. And bilateral, Japan was putting in $1 million a year. That stopped completely. So that hit you hard there. What also hit you was the cutting off of all technological relationships. The Indian scientists who were there, 60 of them were sent back to India. So Israel was obviously not in the picture there. But yes, the relationship with India had picked up. And therefore, when the Kargil war came, Israel was a great help to us. Now, yes, I've stayed away from party politics for a couple of reasons. One, I thought I lacked the intellectual depth and kind of width to handle that, because I had my notes, I had my structure and framework, but the kind of information required to discuss intra-party politics is very difficult. Vinay Sitapati has done that. I admire him for that. But a lot of that is dependent on what people tell you. And there are two problems with people telling you. I know that inexcusable, you have to treat them. One is that people become selective. They tell you things that they like, not what they don't like, which is fine. You have to accept that. Second is more difficult, which is that our memories fail us. So our memories start clouding and we start mixing incidents, And then for, like Nehru Memorial, we do oral history when I was there, and we recorded the statements. And then we have to physically verify every statement made. As a result, it took us, after recording 20 years, to finally certify a paper. Well, each of our persons could certify 3 to 4 pages a day only. So relying on oral history, I find it a little troubling. It is required. I'm glad there are others who are doing that. I don't think so I have the mental bandwidth to do that. Plus, as I told you, though I have mentioned differences with components to the RSS and Mr. Vajpayee, I have made it clear. I'm not hiding it. It is just that I'm not putting enough effort into it, possibly. That I can try. But as I said, I don't think so. I'm trained as a researcher to be able to do oral history and come out of it with any assurance of that is what I'm saying is credible. Biases will definitely come in, and I simply lack the mental capacity to be able to remove the biases. I hope others will do that exercise. From the classroom, there's a hand.
Yeah, there's a hand raised in the classroom. Please go ahead.
Hello, sir. This is Vasu Sharma, student of first year.
Okay, Vasu.
Sir, my question was regarding the incidents of MiG-21 crashes during that particular time. Like from 1999 to 2003, we witnessed considerable incidents of crashes of MiG-29 planes of IAF. As you were part of the government that time, where do you see were the gaps? Like were they in the procurement of the squadrons, or were they in the repair and maintenance?
So I would be frank with you. I don't think so I can answer that question with any amount. I have my own views on the matter. When I had left the government by end of 99, so most of the period you talk about is after the time I left, and this is of great detail. What I believe, based on my discussion with Air Force officers, is we simply lack the resources to allow our planes to be used too much. So the average flying that our flying officers do is possibly not as much as they should be doing. And therefore, their skills in that sense, we are not allowing them to fully fructify. If you fly much more, you have familiarity with the system. But these are very heavy advanced planes, and errors can occur. You are right, errors can occur in maintenance because if systems get right temperature is not maintained, something is not serviced on time, it can lead to a problem. But as I said, I can only give a general answer. I simply do not have the information to talk about it.
Any more questions from the students in the classroom or online? Yes, there's one more question. Please go ahead.
Very good evening, sir. This is Mayank. I'm a second year student. Sir, I had a question regarding Mr. Vajpayee's perspective towards coalition dharma. I will borrow an argument recently that I read on the print, written by the political editor of the print. His name is D.K. Singh, and his argument is that a lot of the allies that the Bharatiya Janata Party has are experiencing some kind of fear and concern regarding their position inside the NDA, because they view the BJP as somewhat of an expansionist party which is banking on Narendra Modi's image to eat into existing voter bases that these extremely small and niche political parties cater to. Sir, do you think this development is more a consequence of the structural changes of Indian politics, or more a consequence of the individual nature of the political personalities associated? In the sense that if Vajpayee ji was alive today, this sort of a development wouldn't take place.
Very good question. Tell me, where are you from?
Sir, I'm from New Delhi.
New Delhi. Okay, that is different. If you're from the south, say Tamil Nadu, you're too young, of course. Even the Tamilians now are too young to know. The DMK was a very, very strong party from grassroots level. The Manrams, they were very, very strong, right? What's it become last 20 years? A family-owned company. Look at the Akali Dal. Look at the Shiv Sena. Mamta was unmarried, found a nephew to be there, to be next to her. So these parties which were mass-based or cadre-based, like DMK was a cadre-based party. ADMK never was. DMK was. ADMK came out from MGR Mandraps only. DMK was gone. So the parties themselves, in that sense, have become so focused on the family. It's a private limited company, not even a public limited company which allows you to buy shares and become a strong unit. That this is a consequence they have to face. One, so there's a structural issue there. The second is that the BJP is growing. Political parties grow and they fall. They won't remain stagnant. Where the BJP is growing, either the allies work with it. The Shiv Sena, the oldest ally of the BJP, quit the alliance on a most unreasonable ground. The BJP had far more MLAs, and yet the Shiv Sena said, I should become the chief minister. So I think the BJP was right not to concede it. You can lose alliance because of that. But yes, you have to learn to manage allies as far as possible. Trouble does arise when BJP starts growing faster and the allies start losing out. Now, is it the BJP's job to sustain the other party? That's an open question. Yes, when you're working together, you want the other party to do well also. But the other party, for its own internal reasons, starts doing badly. BJP either starts pushing into the vacuum or sits back and let a third party come into the picture, So coalition dharma is fine. You need to work with other parties. You want the whole country to be represented. You want your government to be as broad-based as possible. But as I said, it is not the BJP's responsibility to sustain, BJP or any other party, responsibility to sustain other parties. What happened to the left front in Kerala, in Bengal? Gradually, the CPI, the Forward Bloc, the RSP simply disappeared from the scene. Is CPM responsible? In one way, yes. But was it CPM's job to sustain them? I don't think so. So political parties have their own dynamic. They should look after themselves. They should, if you're converting yourself into a shop, family shop, then be prepared for somebody else to move into the space, So that is the kind of thing.
We have a question from my colleague, Dr. Anand. Please, Anand, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Nice to meet you once again for your lectures. Yes. And thanks for enticing us to read your book. But I wouldn't want to wait for that long, and I would like to hear from you one clarification which I needed about this is something which I always been puzzling me about the decision making during the Vajpayee regime, especially during that bus diplomacy time. Like, was that decision to go to Pakistan a wishful thinking, or was it a very calculated risk kind of a scenario? So I would like you to expand more on that. Yeah.
It was not wishful thinking. It was definitely a very calculated risk. You knew there was a risk of failure. You knew that the Pakistani was dead opposed to it. But you also wanted to encourage those forces in Pakistan who realized that the army is a stumbling block in the development of Pakistan. Somebody asked me a question, was Nawaz Sharif pro-India? When he moved out to India, I said, no, he was pro-Pakistan. He realized that the weight of the Pakistani army on that country is so much that the Pakistani economy and Pakistani society is not able to really develop and grow, as is the Pakistani polity. Therefore you had to, one, do that. Two, you have to tell the world that India will take that extra step to stabilize its neighborhood. You had just become a nuclear weapon state. You are an international pariah. You're being condemned by everybody for starting a nuclear race. You're being condemned for threatening stability. Even before India went nuclear, Clinton had called Kashmir the most dangerous place in the world. You had to prove that you guys are all wrong. We are a mature, responsible country. We are not some Wild West gunslinging guys who go into and pick up bites. We do not like fights. But when it comes to fighting to defend us, we shall defend ourselves. So this message had to go out to the world, and Vajpayee had to take that risk. Had it clicked, had the Pakistani ever gone on the back foot, people said, what a great move. But had Lahore not happened, the international pressure on Pakistan during Kargil would not have happened. So, we have to, as a serious international relations scholar, look at the consequences also beyond the immediate. I mean, you're not crossing the LOC. You're taking a risk, but especially with Pakistan. All that convinced the world that this hyphenation India-Pakistan is wrong. India is in a league by itself. Pakistan is one of those countries who are determined to score self-goals. Unfortunately, Pakistan's self-goals cost us in human lives, but that's a collateral damage of living next to such a country. Country is nothing wrong with the country. Living next to a country where its military has such a grip over that country's polity and economy.
Thank you, sir. There is time for one more question. Do we have any more questions from the audience? Okay.
So I'm going to watch Amazon tonight and see how much has my sales gone up today.
So again, I'll take the liberty, sir, of being the moderator to ask the last question.
Yeah,
and
please.
Something that is, that's from a selfish interest point of view, a question from someone who studies American politics. So I want, see the point that I have been, raising on my mind, sir, it's that you were somehow closely linked with the administration at a point of time when those who study US-India relations often call that period the last days of, it's very interesting for me because in the Clinton period, you had Clinton sort of, at least the Commerce Department in US sort of realizing the economic potential of India and then making those moves. But then you had the nuclear test and then the sanctions. And I believe that for America, sanctions have become a default foreign policy mechanism. You don't know what to do with sanctions. Right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
you had sanctions, and then in a very short period of time, you had the turnaround in terms of the Talbot, Jaswant Singh Talbot talks and America's dispensation towards India during the Kargil War. And also in 2000 and March, you have this monumental visit by Bill Clinton to India. So as someone who studies America right now and is looking at this opportunity of a closer relationship, but then also is cautioned by going too close to the Americans. Since you have seen those times where this relationship was taking a turn with the bittersweet elements of sanctions, but then America turning around and supporting India in some cases, how would you advise someone like me who looks at this relationship that in the times to come, what should be the cautionary tale and what should be the red flags that one should see when dealing with the Americans?
One of the very thought-provoking question. One of the problems we're dealing with America is the American administrations simply lack, at the top, institutional memory. So each new Secretary of State comes, President comes, they want to do things which some of them has been tried before, and they don't have a very nice handover system, all said and done. Having said that, I'm glad you mentioned the Clinton later part. By and large, the change of relationship post-Kargil, and even though the last sanctions lasted till end of 2000, so they're not the sanctions were removed because of Kargil and it took Clinton's visit or Vajpayee's visit to the White House, the lovely state dinner we all attended, is that the American establishment then, State Department particularly, and the CIA, were heavily invested in Pakistan, and they were very warm towards China. Clinton, in fact, suggested after Pokhran that China intervene and sort out issues between India and Pakistan as a result of the test. I mean, how idiotic is that? But Americans lacked so much of finesse. But yet when the change came, it was a change led by the top. So when even the Bush administration now comes in, Condoleezza Rice did a very nice piece on India and foreign policy before the Bush administration came to power. Very good at it in foreign affairs. The thicker one, foreign affairs.
In national
right?
interest.
No, foreign affairs also here an article.
Yeah.
Besides the national interest. National interest was right wing in any case, but even foreign affairs article, right? Now, the State Department was still generally hostile to India. The Defense Department slowly started moving closer to India. But the defense fellows were the first one to start detecting changes in China. The state, Clinton, G2, Bush was not into G2, but Bush also took some time to move up. But when he was invested in India and Condoleezza Rice, the rest of the system wasn't invested in India. Colin Powell, for that, Secretary of State, was not that gung-ho in India at all. You come to Obama. Obama starts by saying we wanted G2. We and China will sort out the world, right? He wanted a common points person for AFPAC and India, Kashmir. We hit hard, they backed out, the Americans backed out. And it took Clinton, Obama, a number of years to understand that they need a pivot to Asia in their interest, not in my interest, not in the interest of ASEAN, the American interest. But the change was so nice by now that by the time Trump comes in, and Trump is erratic, so I'll not even go into that today's proof, but very erratic. By the time the Trump administration comes, the US establishment is firmly understanding India and interested that despite presidential ups and downs, we need to engage India much greater. So today now, when you have this transition coming in, where Biden saying Russia is a bigger rival than China, and you are seen as being very closely associated with the Trump administration, India definitely will take some time. And it's not the first time. When Clinton was replaced by George Bush, the Indian establishment then was fully invested in Al Gore, not in George Bush. We make this mistake, which is fine. So we would, and though we have enough good relationship with people in the Biden administration, incoming ones, but lingering doubts are there. We would take some time, not on the personal issues, but on the Russia-China problem. For us, China is the issue, not Russia. Russia is today literally existing as a junior partner of China. So why touch the junior partner when you need the bigger country, you know? So it'll take us some time to work with the Biden administration, to work them to understanding that in the larger part of the world, the Indo-Pacific, in terms of the economy and the future, it is China you have to address. So it's going to be a lot of hard work. Hard work is there each time. It's not that you're comfortable at the US and things will remain comfortable. In the USA, this lack of digital memory and local domestic economic factors do cause these problems. You know, the US domestic industry today, US Chamber of Commerce, is still heavily invested in China. They're uncomfortable, this pushback against China, right? So you really will have to do a lot of hard work to convince the incoming administration that no, nobody wants a fight with China, but please understand that China is undercutting your position in your backyard.
Thank you so much, sir. I think everyone will agree along with me that we stand so much more enlightened than we were at 3:30 before this program started. And thank you so much. But I have my colleague, Dr. Anand, who I will request to propose a formal vote of thanks before we.
And Anand has 1.5 minutes to do that, so that we can end exactly at 5.
Yeah, so thank you, sir, for taking time out of your schedule and giving us an overview about your very important book, which is quite timely to look at. And in fact, you have certainly broken a lot of stereotypes which are associated with that particular administration, that particular era. And I thank you for discussing about that with the students here. And certainly, I'm sure that this must have aroused their curiosity to research more into this area as well as to read your book as well. I would also like to thank Sri Seshadri Chari for giving his viewpoints in being part of that same team on the Vajpayee era and its foreign policy. I also would like to thank Monish sir for moderating this session as well as coordinating this entire event, and as well as I also would like to thank Dr. Nandkishore for guiding us and facilitating this special discussion. I would also like to express my gratitude to all the students who have actively participated in this online discussion and raised very pertinent questions. Also to those who are participating from outside the institution as well. So I would like to thank all of you and wish you a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. It was lovely. Lovely.
5 p.m. 5 p.m. bang on.
Exactly.
Thank you, sir.
Take care.
Thank you.
Take
Thank
care.
you. Thank you. Thank you all everyone. Thank you.